The Galactic Empire had conquered countless planets, their soldiers marching across worlds with a reputation for unmatched strength and superior technology. They were the apex of military prowess, their advanced weaponry capable of turning entire civilizations into submission within days. On distant planets, their victories were swift, leaving little resistance in their wake. Their conquests became so effortless that the soldiers began to view war as routine, a process where brute force and technological dominance always secured the upper hand. Humanity, from their small and relatively unknown planet Earth, seemed insignificant by comparison. The galactic soldiers heard rumors of Earth's forces, particularly their special units, but they scoffed at the idea that humans could pose any real challenge. To the Galactic Empire, humans were primitive, a race that had barely ventured beyond their own solar system. Their military tech was outdated, their tactics unremarkable. Earth was just another planet on the long list of territories awaiting domination. Conversations among the galactic soldiers often devolved into mockery when Earth was mentioned. They laughed at the idea of human special forces like the SAS, assuming that such units would be no different from the countless other species' futile attempts at resistance. "They think their elite soldiers can stand a chance?" one of them joked. "We've seen this before, over and over. It's always the same, no match for our tech." Their arrogance was palpable. They viewed humanity as a minor inconvenience, a backward species whose days were numbered. Earth's military, in their eyes, was nothing more than a relic of an obsolete era. The galactic soldiers believed that with their cutting-edge technology, drones, exosuits, and plasma rifles, they had no reason to worry about this backwater planet's defense forces. Even the galactic commanders, seasoned veterans of numerous planetary campaigns, dismissed Earth as a simple target. In their strategic briefings, they allocated minimal resources to the invasion, confident that overwhelming force would crush any resistance in mere days. "It'll be like crushing insects underfoot," one commander had said confidently. They believed their superiority was absolute, and there was no scenario where Earth's defenses could hold. But while the galactic forces prepared to launch their assault, something different was happening on Earth. In the shadows, away from the public eye, the SAS, the Special Air Service, Earth's elite special forces, was preparing too. There was no fanfare, no grand speeches. They knew what was coming, and they knew how to respond. Where the galactic soldiers relied on brute strength and overwhelming numbers, the SAS thrived on precision, stealth, and strategy. They had fought in the most hostile environments on Earth and had adapted their tactics to face any challenge. They weren't the type to stand in line and face the enemy head-on. Instead, they would fight in the shadows, striking where the enemy least expected. The galactic soldiers didn't know this, of course. To them, the SAS was just another group of primitive fighters. What they didn't realize was that Earth's special forces had a history of defeating opponents who underestimated them. The SAS wasn't about size or strength. It was about skill, adaptability, and ruthlessness when it counted. As the galactic soldiers touched down on Earth, their starships blocking out the sky, the invasion seemed like a foregone conclusion. The first waves of their troops landed, marching forward with the confidence of a force that had never been defeated. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, weapons at the ready. They fully expected Earth's defenses to crumble instantly under their superior firepower. But the SAS had already begun to move. They didn't need the pomp and spectacle of an intergalactic army. Instead, they worked in silence, setting up traps, gathering intel, and observing the enemy's every move. They didn't panic when the invasion began, nor did they rush to meet the galactic soldiers head-on. They knew that rushing into a confrontation would only play into the Galactic Empire's hands. Instead, they watched, waited, and analyzed every tactical flaw in the enemy's approach. The galactic soldiers, oblivious to the SAS presence, continued to mock the very idea of Earth's special forces. "They're probably hiding in their bunkers," one soldier sneered. Another chimed in. "Once we find them, it'll be over in minutes." Their overconfidence blinded them to the reality of the situation. They didn't notice the subtle signs that something was wrong. Equipment went missing. Communications began to fail intermittently. Some soldiers reported strange sounds in the dark, footsteps that disappeared before they could investigate. But these were brushed off as technical glitches or the result of human fear. After all, they were the Galactic Empire, the most advanced military force in the universe. How could a few humans pose any real threat? And so, they continued with their invasion plans, completely unaware that they were walking into a trap. The SAS wasn't going to fight them on their terms. They were going to fight a different kind of war, a war of attrition, precision strikes, and psychological warfare. The Galactic soldiers, used to crushing their enemies with sheer firepower, were about to face an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't predict. As the sun set on Earth, the Galactic soldiers settled into their base camps, still laughing about how easy their mission was going to be. But the SAS had already infiltrated their ranks, planting seeds of doubt and fear. Their first strike wouldn't come with a loud explosion or a full frontal assault. It would come in the dead of night, silent and unseen, as the Galactic soldiers slept soundly, confident in their impending victory. They didn't know it yet, but the war had already begun, and Earth's special forces were just getting started. The Galactic soldiers had set up their camps across the planet, their towering machines and advanced weaponry in full display. They believed they had already secured victory. Their confidence was evident in their lax security measures, as if nothing on Earth could challenge their superiority. Yet, while they saw the silence of the night as a sign of their dominance, the SAS saw it as the perfect opportunity. The first strike came swiftly and without warning. In the middle of the night, one of the Galactic soldiers' communication outposts went dark. There were no explosions, no alarms, just complete silence. When soldiers arrived to investigate, they found nothing. No signs of a struggle, no clues, just an empty station. The tech-savvy Galactic soldiers dismissed it as a malfunction, believing their superior equipment had simply failed due to Earth's atmosphere or some unforeseen technical issue. But that was only the beginning. Within hours, several other key outposts lost communication as well. The soldiers who were sent to check on them didn't return. Panic started to creep into the ranks. The once overconfident Galactic soldiers were now faced with a new reality. Something was targeting them, something they couldn't see or predict. They couldn't even detect the attackers on their advanced scanners, which had been designed to detect movement across vast distances. To them, this was impossible. They were the most technologically advanced force in the galaxy. How could anything on this primitive planet outmaneuver them? What they didn't realize was that the SAS had no intention of fighting on the Galactic Empire's terms. The SAS had spent decades perfecting their guerrilla warfare tactics, knowing how to exploit any weakness in an enemy's structure. And the Galactic soldiers had many weaknesses, the biggest of which was their reliance on their technology. They were so dependent on their machines and devices that they couldn't imagine an enemy who didn't rely on the same tools. The SAS, however, knew how to blend into the environment, how to move like shadows, and how to strike without leaving a trace. The Galactic commanders, growing increasingly frustrated, ordered more troops to reinforce the outposts. Their response was predictable: send more firepower, deploy more drones, and increase their technological presence. But this only played into the SAS' hands. The more the Galactic soldiers relied on their tech, the easier it was for the SAS to exploit it. They jammed signals, cut off power, and took out critical infrastructure piece by piece, all while remaining invisible to their enemy. The fear among the Galactic soldiers began to grow. They had never faced an enemy like this before. To them, war was about brute force, about overwhelming an opponent with superior firepower. But the SAS didn't care about firepower. They cared about precision, about striking where it hurt the most and then disappearing before the enemy even realized what had happened. As the days went on, the situation became even more dire for the Galactic forces. Their communications were in disarray, their supply lines were being disrupted, and their troops were growing more paranoid by the hour. The once confident and arrogant soldiers were now afraid to venture out of their base camps at night, fearing they would never return. Every shadow, every noise filled them with dread. The SAS knew they had the upper hand. They had studied their enemy, understood their tactics, and were now exploiting every weakness. While the Galactic soldiers were highly trained in conventional warfare, they had no experience with the kind of unconventional tactics the SAS was using. And that was their downfall. The SAS operated in small, highly coordinated teams, striking with precision and leaving no evidence behind. Their goal wasn't to engage the Galactic soldiers in direct combat, it was to wear them down mentally and physically. They knew that if they could break the morale of the enemy, victory would follow. The Galactic commanders, desperate for answers, began to make mistakes. They ordered their troops to move out in larger numbers, believing that sheer force would overwhelm the SAS. But this only made them more vulnerable. The SAS, now fully aware of the Galactic soldiers' movements, continued their strategy of hit-and-run tactics, targeting the largest and most exposed units. It wasn't just about killing soldiers. It was about dismantling the entire command structure of the Galactic forces. The SAS focused on high-value targets, communications officers, engineers, and field commanders. Every loss further destabilized the Galactic troops, leaving them disorganized and panicked. In the midst of the chaos, some of the Galactic soldiers began to question the wisdom of their mission. They had been told that Earth was a primitive planet, that its inhabitants posed no real threat. But now, they were the ones on the defensive, their confidence shattered by an enemy they couldn't even see. What was once a simple mission had turned into a nightmare. The SAS, on the other hand, remained calm and methodical. They didn't let the scope of the enemy force intimidate them. They had fought larger enemies before and won, not through brute strength, but through strategy and cunning. They knew that if they kept up the pressure, the Galactic forces would eventually crack. And crack they did. The first signs of desertion began to appear among the Galactic ranks. Soldiers, terrified of being the next to disappear, started abandoning their posts. Others, convinced that their technology had failed them, began questioning the superiority of their equipment. The cracks in the Galactic soldiers' once impenetrable facade were growing wider by the day. The SAS had succeeded in doing what no other force had done before. They had made the Galactic soldiers afraid. They had turned the invaders' own arrogance against them, showing them that technology alone wasn't enough to win a war. In the end, it wasn't about who had the most advanced weapons or the largest army. It was about who had the skill, the discipline, and the will to fight until the very end. And the SAS, Earth's elite force, had all three in abundance. The Galactic commanders were beginning to realize that they were no longer in control. Their initial arrogance had given way to frustration, and now that frustration was turning into fear. Their soldiers, once confident in their technological superiority, were growing increasingly paranoid. No matter how much they deployed, no matter how advanced their weapons or how many soldiers they sent, the SAS always seemed to be one step ahead. It wasn't just the SAS' ability to strike that unnerved the Galactic forces. It was their invisibility. They couldn't see them, couldn't hear them, couldn't detect them on any of their scanners. They were fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The Galactic soldiers were used to overwhelming their enemies with brute force and numbers. But now, those numbers were meaningless. Every time they tried to retaliate, they were striking at shadows. The SAS, for their part, remained disciplined. They knew they couldn't match the Galactic soldiers in a head-on confrontation, and they didn't need to. Their tactics were designed to exploit the Galactic forces' overconfidence and reliance on technology. They weren't interested in massive battles. Instead, they focused on strategic, surgical strikes, cutting off communication lines, sabotaging supply routes, and isolating key units. Each hit was precise, calculated, and devastating to the morale of the Galactic troops. Word began to spread among the Galactic soldiers. They whispered about the ghosts that hunted them, the unseen force that seemed to know their every move. Some soldiers claimed that the SAS could move through walls, disappear in the blink of an eye. Others said that Earth itself was fighting back, that the planet's terrain was alive, working with the human forces to protect them. These rumors, while far from the truth, only heightened the fear and confusion within the ranks. The SAS understood that fear was a powerful weapon. They didn't just want to defeat the Galactic soldiers. They wanted to break them mentally. They used every psychological tactic in their arsenal, planting false intelligence, leaving misleading clues, and exploiting the alien soldiers' growing paranoia. They knew that the more uncertain their enemy became, the easier it would be to push them into making critical mistakes. And mistakes were starting to happen. The Galactic commanders, desperate to regain control, began issuing erratic orders. They deployed more troops into areas they believed were SAS strongholds, only to find themselves walking into ambushes. They sent out reconnaissance teams, but none returned. Their attempts to counter the SAS guerrilla tactics were clumsy and predictable, playing right into the humans' hands. Even the advanced drones and automated systems the Galactic forces relied on were no match for the SAS ingenuity. The SAS used simple, old-school methods to jam signals, disable surveillance, and confuse the enemy's technology. They understood that technology, no matter how advanced, had its limits. And the Galactic forces, in their arrogance, had never considered that those limits could be exploited by what they deemed a primitive species. The breaking point came when one of the Galactic commanders, a high-ranking officer who had led countless successful campaigns across the galaxy, was captured. His abduction was swift, silent, and utterly humiliating for the Galactic forces. They had believed that he was untouchable, surrounded by the best protection their empire could offer. But the SAS had infiltrated his command center without detection, taking him right from under their noses. The capture of such a key figure sent shockwaves through the Galactic forces. The soldiers, already on edge, now felt completely vulnerable. If their commanders weren't safe, then who was? The SAS had proven that no one was beyond their reach. The fear that had been simmering under the surface now boiled over into full-blown panic. Desperation set in. The Galactic soldiers, once so sure of their dominance, began to unravel. Some units went rogue, disobeying orders in a futile attempt to escape the invisible threat. Others abandoned their posts altogether, fleeing into the wilderness, where they believed they might have a better chance of survival. It was chaos. The Galactic command tried to maintain control, but it was too late. Their forces were crumbling from within, their discipline shattered. They had underestimated their enemy from the start, and now they were paying the price. Meanwhile, the SAS continued their relentless assault, never giving the Galactic forces a moment to regroup or recover. They exploited every weakness, every crack in the alien forces' armor. Where the Galactic soldiers had once seen humans as nothing more than weaklings, they now saw them as terrifying predators. Earth's special forces had turned the tide of the war, not through superior firepower, but through sheer tactical brilliance and psychological warfare. The Galactic commanders, now fully aware that their invasion was failing, began to consider the unthinkable: retreat. It was an admission of defeat, something the Galactic Empire had never done. But they were out of options. Their forces were demoralized, their supply lines were in tatters, and they were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't see or understand. Staying any longer meant certain destruction. And so, after days of mounting losses and growing chaos, the order was given. The Galactic forces would retreat. The starships that had once descended on Earth with such arrogance and confidence now lifted off in silence, their hulls scarred, their crews defeated. The invasion that was supposed to be an easy victory for the Galactic Empire had turned into a disaster. As the last of the starships disappeared into the sky, Earth's special forces, the SAS, watched from the shadows. They had done what no one had thought possible. They had defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Not with numbers, not with advanced technology, but with skill, strategy, and the ability to turn the enemy's own arrogance against them. The Galactic soldiers, who had once laughed at the idea of Earth's special forces, now carried the scars of their encounter. They had learned a hard lesson: never underestimate humanity. And the SAS, Earth's elite force, had once again proven why they were the best of the best. As the Galactic forces prepared for their final assault, they believed they had one last chance to regain control of the situation. They consolidated their remaining troops, pulling back to what they deemed a secure and impenetrable stronghold. This time, they were certain they had accounted for every possible variable. Their remaining commanders, desperate to salvage the mission, devised a plan to overwhelm the SAS with sheer numbers and superior firepower. They believed that if they concentrated their forces, they could finally catch the elusive humans in the open. But the SAS had anticipated every move. They knew the galactic forces were regrouping for a final push, and they had no intention of allowing it to succeed. The SAS understood that the galactic soldiers were relying on their old methods again: more troops, more weapons, more reliance on technology. And once again, they would turn those strengths into weaknesses. While the galactic soldiers fortified their position, the SAS moved in silently, operating in the darkness and using the terrain to their advantage. They didn't engage in open combat, and they didn't confront the galactic forces head-on. Instead, they methodically dismantled the enemy's defenses from within. Power systems were sabotaged, critical supply depots were destroyed, and essential communication lines were cut. The galactic soldiers, already exhausted and demoralized, found themselves even more isolated and vulnerable. Despite the overwhelming firepower at their disposal, the galactic forces were fighting an enemy they couldn't target. The SAS didn't give them a single clear opportunity for a direct confrontation. Instead, they used distraction and misdirection, keeping the galactic soldiers on edge, forcing them to react to threats that weren't there. Every time the galactic forces believed they had pinned down the SAS, the humans would disappear, reappearing in a completely different location to strike again. The galactic commanders, who had once been so confident in their advanced systems, now realized those systems had become liabilities. Their reliance on technology had made them predictable, and the SAS exploited that predictability at every turn. The galactic forces deployed their drones to scout for the human special forces, but the SAS had anticipated this. They set up decoys and false signals, leading the drones to search in the wrong locations, while the real SAS teams moved in for the kill. As the night wore on, the pressure on the galactic soldiers intensified. Their nerves were fraying. Every shadow seemed to contain a threat, every sound made them flinch. Soldiers who had once laughed at the thought of Earth's special forces now found themselves trembling at the possibility of being the next target. They had never experienced this kind of psychological warfare before. Their advanced training and technological superiority meant nothing against an enemy who refused to fight on their terms. The SAS, meanwhile, remained calm and focused. Their years of training in unconventional warfare had prepared them for exactly this kind of scenario. They knew that victory wouldn't come through brute strength, it would come through patience, precision, and exploiting the enemy's fear. And that fear was now spreading like wildfire through the galactic ranks. The final turning point came when the galactic soldiers, in their desperation, made a critical mistake. Believing they had finally cornered the SAS, they launched an all-out assault, deploying their remaining forces in a concentrated strike. But the SAS had predicted this move long before it happened. They had lured the galactic soldiers into a trap, a carefully orchestrated ambush that took full advantage of the terrain and the alien soldiers' overconfidence. When the galactic forces launched their attack, they found themselves surrounded. The SAS had positioned themselves perfectly, using the environment to block escape routes and funnel the enemy into vulnerable positions. What had been planned as a final, decisive strike by the galactic commanders quickly turned into a massacre. The galactic soldiers, trapped and confused, were unable to mount an effective defense. Their advanced weapons and armor were useless in the face of the SAS' superior tactics. The ambush was swift and devastating. Within minutes, the galactic forces were in full retreat, their once unshakable discipline shattered. They had expected to crush the humans with overwhelming force, but instead, they found themselves fleeing for their lives. The SAS didn't pursue them openly, there was no need. The galactic soldiers had already been broken, both mentally and physically. Their numbers were decimated, and their will to fight was gone. As the remnants of the galactic forces retreated, the SAS began their final operations to ensure that the enemy could not regroup. They targeted key command posts, disabling any remaining leadership and cutting off any hope of a coordinated counterattack. The once mighty galactic army, which had arrived on Earth with such confidence, was now a scattered and defeated force, limping away from a planet they had vastly underestimated. In the aftermath of the ambush, the Galactic commanders were forced to face the harsh reality of their failure. They had underestimated humanity from the start, dismissing Earth's special forces as insignificant. But the SAS had shown them that war wasn't just about technology or numbers. It was about strategy, adaptability, and the ability to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. And in that regard, the SAS had proven themselves to be far superior. For the Galactic soldiers who survived, the retreat was a humbling experience. They had been trained to believe that they were invincible, that no species could stand against the might of the Galactic Empire. But Earth had shattered that illusion. The humans had fought back with a level of skill and cunning that the Galactic forces had never encountered before. The SAS had turned the tide of the battle, not with advanced weapons, but with their mastery of the art of war. As the Galactic starships lifted off from Earth, the soldiers aboard them carried with them a newfound respect and fear of humanity. They had learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate the strength and resolve of a determined enemy, no matter how primitive they might seem. And for the SAS, the victory was not just a matter of defending Earth, it was a statement. They had faced the most powerful military force in the galaxy and emerged victorious. They had shown the Galactic Empire that humanity was not to be trifled with, that Earth's defenders were a force to be reckoned with. The war was over, but the message was clear. The SAS had proven that, when pushed to the edge, humanity had the ability to fight back and win. The Galactic forces had been broken. The remnants of their once mighty invasion fleet limped away from Earth, retreating into the vastness of space, their pride shattered. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had been bested, not by overwhelming numbers or superior firepower, but by an enemy they had considered beneath them. The SAS had not only defended Earth but also exposed the fatal flaws in the Galactic Empire's arrogance and over-reliance on technology. Back on Earth, the SAS didn't celebrate with fanfare or parades. There were no grand speeches or public displays of triumph. That wasn't their way. Their victory was quiet, professional, and absolute. They had done what they were trained to do: protect their people, outthink their enemy, and adapt to any situation. It wasn't about glory, it was about getting the job done, and they had done it with precision and discipline. As the surviving members of the Galactic Invasion Force recounted their experiences, the stories of Earth's special forces spread quickly through the ranks of the Empire's military. The SAS became a legend almost overnight, their tactics studied, their methods analyzed. The Galactic commanders, desperate to understand how such a small and primitive force had managed to defeat them, began rethinking everything they knew about warfare. The SAS had demonstrated that war wasn't just about who had the most advanced technology or the largest army. It was about intelligence, strategy, and the ability to think on your feet. The Galactic soldiers had been conditioned to believe that their superior equipment would win any battle, but the SAS had proven otherwise. They had shown that sometimes the sharpest weapon wasn't a plasma rifle or an advanced drone, it was the human mind. But the aftermath of the battle went deeper than military lessons. The Galactic Empire's defeat at the hands of the SAS sent shockwaves through their society. For a species that had built its entire identity around military dominance and technological superiority, losing to Earth's special forces was more than just a military setback. It was a blow to their very sense of invincibility. Among the Galactic soldiers, respect for humanity grew. The SAS, once mocked as an insignificant and outdated force, were now spoken of with reverence. Alien troops who had survived the invasion spoke in hushed tones about the humans who had moved like ghosts, striking without warning and disappearing before anyone could react. These stories spread far beyond Earth, reaching other planets and species that had once feared the might of the Galactic Empire. For the Galactic commanders, the defeat forced a reassessment of their entire approach to warfare. They had relied too heavily on brute force and overwhelming numbers, believing that no enemy could match them. But the SAS had taught them a harsh lesson: no matter how powerful you are, if you fail to respect your enemy, you will always be vulnerable. The SAS had exploited every weakness in the Galactic soldiers' tactics, turning their strengths into liabilities and using their overconfidence against them. It wasn't long before rumors of the SAS victory reached the highest levels of the Galactic government. Political leaders, who had been assured of a quick and decisive conquest of Earth, were now faced with the embarrassing reality that their forces had been outmaneuvered by a much smaller and less advanced enemy. There were calls for accountability, for answers as to how such a disaster could have occurred. But there were no simple answers. The truth was that the SAS had been underestimated, and the Galactic forces had paid the price. Back on Earth, life slowly returned to normal. The invasion, once seen as an existential threat, was now a story of resilience and survival. The people of Earth had stood their ground, and their special forces had proven that humanity was not to be trifled with. But the SAS didn't seek recognition for their efforts. They returned to the shadows, ready for the next mission, always prepared for whatever threat might come next. For the Galactic Empire, the defeat marked the beginning of a long and painful reckoning. They had believed themselves to be unbeatable, but Earth had shattered that illusion. Now, they would have to face the consequences of their hubris. The lesson that the SAS had taught them would resonate for years to come, changing the way they approached future conflicts. No longer would they dismiss an enemy based on appearances or technology alone. The Galactic soldiers who had survived the invasion returned to their home planets, forever changed by what they had experienced. They had come to Earth expecting an easy victory, but they had left with a deep respect for the humans who had fought them. The SAS had shown them that there was more to warfare than technology, that courage, cunning, and adaptability could overcome even the most advanced military machine. As the Galactic forces retreated into space, the SAS watched from a distance, knowing that the battle was over but always prepared for what might come next. They had defended their home, not with overwhelming force, but with intelligence, discipline, and strategy. And in doing so, they had sent a message to the galaxy: humanity would not be underestimated again. The Galactic Empire, once so sure of its dominance, had learned the hard way that strength wasn't just measured in firepower or numbers. It was measured in resolve, in the ability to adapt, and in the willingness to fight when all seemed lost. The SAS had embodied that spirit, and their victory had changed the course of history. For Earth, the future was uncertain. The Galactic Empire had been defeated, but no one knew what the long-term consequences would be. But the SAS remained vigilant, ready to defend their planet against any threat, knowing that they had proven themselves capable of standing against even the most powerful forces in the galaxy. In the end, the battle wasn't just a victory for the SAS or for Earth, it was a testament to the power of human resilience. The Galactic soldiers had laughed at the idea of Earth's special forces, but in the end, it was the SAS who had the last laugh.